And then the other time that's a lot less frequent, but does still arise, is when the data has been collected pursuant to a sponsored project and there are restrictions on the use of that data. So that would be even if it's not human subjects data, but it's subject to some restriction from the sponsor, and you want to be able to comply with that when we transfer it. Turn it over to Khadijah.
Hi guys, Khadijah Muller-Clements here. So if any of you recognize my unusual long name, please stop by, introduce yourselves. I really enjoy working with you. I'd love to put a face with your email address. Okay, so unless your project is severely delayed or you're mad at me, and then I'll see you guys next year. So I have the dubious distinction of standing between you and lunch. So I'm going to try and wrap this up and we're going to try and keep this moving. How many of y'all are busy? Anybody busy in here? How about two hands, right? A lot of us are busy, right? How do you like change, right? You can't keep your stuff together. You're drowning in what you're doing. And I'm going to give you a whole new process that you got to figure out. How about that? We like that? No, none of us likes that. And so I get that, right? We agree with that. We understand that. But we're hoping to update some things, bring some changes to the table. That's going to make your life a little bit easier. With what I'm proposing, it's not really a change. It's just kind of revamping what we're doing and kind of changing the order to kind of deal with some of the inefficiencies. The question becomes, well, what do we need to do, right? Because y'all are busy, I'm busy. Change requires you to kind of mix it up a little bit, kind of have a little bit of discomfort in the beginning. So why are we going to do that? So one of the things that we have going on is we've had instances where you get a fully executed agreement, ready to go, we're ready to transfer data, and then we realize it is a Carolina data warehouse issue. And Carolina data warehouse has very specific terms and agreements that they will use. And so now you're delayed because what we negotiated doesn't match their requirements because we didn't know it was a CDW data. So that's obviously a problem. It's going to create a delay for you. Okay. Something else, you get a DUA because you guys are friends and everything's great. And it doesn't address publication because y'all go way back. You went to medical school together. You went, you guys take golfing trips. Y'all are tight. You're cool, right? But then that friendship goes a little bit south and your counterpart thinks that they did more work on the project and their publication should be X, Y, and Z. And then we don't have language to address that. And so your beautiful friendship turns into a divorce that has some kind of particular things where people don't necessarily get along and agree. Hoping to avoid that, right? So we're trying to save you that heartache later in your divorce proceeding. You get a fully executed DUA. Again, it doesn't meet the project, right? Now you're discussing your confidential information from the university. There's no guidelines in there to protect that. It doesn't protect your brilliant thoughts, right? You put all this work into it, you've put all this effort, and you don't have an agreement in place to protect what you came up with. And so again, this is a problem that we're hoping to address. And when we have DUAs and collaboration agreements, we need to understand what your project looks like so that we could protect you in the event that things go badly, or at least give like a roadmap so that everybody kind of is on the same page. Another problem is you just completed your collaboration agreement only to realize your IRB doesn't allow you to do that. Well, now Houston, we have a problem, right? This is a big problem because we have to have this governance. We have to make sure everybody's on the same page and that the IRB and informed consent allow you to transfer and do what you're wanting to do in your agreement. Again, trying to fix this on the front end so that we're not weeping in the end, okay? And finally, another issue is you just submitted a project into Alice 4 weeks ago. Please don't raise your hand on that, right? This wasn't a raise your hand question, but you've submitted your project into Alice 4 weeks ago and your contracting officer is still asking you questions. Again, no hands, thank you very much. We're hoping to address that, right? We're hoping to restructure what we're doing so as to kind of smooth some of this stuff out and make sure that you guys get the agreement that you want. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it's wildly inefficient. One of the things that we're trying to fix and catch on the front end is it a DUA or a collaboration agreement, right? That's kind of the big distinction. Most of our agreements come in as DUAs, but once we start asking questions, we really decide that it's a collaboration agreement, right? And so what we're doing is updating the intake process for the DUAs to sidestep some of these problems that we just discussed, to eliminate the inefficiency, to getting your project moving faster. One of the ways that we're going to head off these problems and increase efficiency is to determine whether you need a DUA or a collaboration on the front end. What is the difference, right? It's all a bunch of words to you all, right? But it really matters at the end of the day. I explain it like this. A DUA is kind of like a lawnmower. Your data is your lawnmower. You loan it to your neighbor, right? You don't go mow your neighbor's lawn. You give them the lawnmower, they use it, and then they return it back to you. That's kind of what a DUA is. You're just giving somebody else your data to kind of look at it and come up with their own theories, hypotheses, work through it. That's a DUA, right? A collaboration agreement, on the other hand, is kind of like a football team. You're bringing your expertise and your A game, and they're bringing their expertise and their A game, and their quarterback and your running back. Put it together, and you come up with a winning combination. You guys are working together. You're analyzing. You're planning to jointly publish. You guys are working together. So the difference between the two is the amount of work you're doing. Are you just loaning it, or are you actually working? And it matters. That brings on the next question, is why does it matter? When we have the wrong agreement, we have the wrong protection, right? One of the problems we have is publication. Again, going back to our messy divorce, our scope of work, they say, well, we didn't agree to that, or you didn't agree to that, or whatever. We lay these things out and kind of set out a bit of a roadmap in the beginning to try and alleviate some of those things. And then if you have IP that happens to develop, because when you got really smart folks working together, what happens? Really smart things can happen. And so we put in some IP language to make sure that we're all covered, we're all on the same page, some very basic things. And with that in mind, obviously a collaboration agreement is going to require a lot more work on our part, and we're going to need a lot more questions answered for you. So currently, the current process is as follows. You all will submit to Alice and send it into this giant tech black hole, right? You fill out your paperwork and send it to us. Then what happens is it goes to our administrative team, and our teams are great, on at least the ones that I deal with. Our administrative teams are really good. They pull it out of the system. They put it all together. They do some voodoo. I don't really know what happens. They do some magic and some voodoo, and voila, we have an Alice record, right? This Alice record goes into this giant bucket. And so then my boss will look, and they go down and they say, oh, Khadijah needs something to do. She doesn't have anything to do. Let's send her this. Or Khadijah has been requested. That does happen. I have a few fans. I don't know if any of you are in here. Hi. And so then it's assigned to a contracting officer. And then what happens then is we piece together what we have. We're like, is this a DUA? Is this a collaboration? I'm looking at what you submitted, and I'm like, is there a work reference? And I'm trying to get the intention of what you're doing to try and get this figured out, because then I have to fix it administratively too, because my system says it's a DUA, but is it really? And probably the answer to that 50% of the time is no, it's not. It's a collaboration where y'all are doing work together. So half of what we're getting is mislabeled in the beginning. And so obviously, we need all of this information for drafting. Then we do back and forth between the PI, the department, to be able to get the information that we need. What are your thoughts on publication? Do you anticipate IP coming out of this? Is this Carolina data warehouse? We don't want you crying at the end. And so we're trying to nip that in the bud and prepare a document that's useful now and in the future. And all of these things are wildly inefficient. So going back to that, what happens is we don't have this key information. You guys aren't, and you're not prompted to. It's not an issue for you all, but we don't have a way to prompt you to ask you, is there IP involved? Is there joint publication? What data elements are being sent? What's your scope of work? What are you guys going to be doing this weekend, right? These are things that we need to know, but currently aren't getting in the beginning. So we're ready for this project. We're ready to do this. We're standing here. Well, not standing. I'm sitting at my desk typing up. And we're ready to go, but this file is not ready to go. We have to reach back out to the department. The PI is on vacation. The PI is at a conference. The PIs have midterms and finals and everything that everybody does. That we're busy, everybody, we're busy. So that's where we're at. And that delays things further. And then additionally, if you tell me that I have this particular genetic strain of XYZ ABC, I got to call somebody, right? Like that's not where I'm able to help. I've got to tag in another office to make sure that we have the IP language that protects what you need. And again, I'm not discovering this until the very end of my drafting process. And these are all delays, right? These are all things that cause your project to get delayed. And so we're hoping to try and address some of those things. And Kim's going to talk a little bit about that.
Thanks, Khadijah. I should have thought of a sports analogy to work into my slides.
Yeah.
Football analogy, but I didn't.
Yeah.
So yes, as I said at the beginning, we're working to update our submission process. It would probably surprise most of you how limited our current questions are on the RF for Alice. As Khadijah said, even if the person submitting it fills out every question perfectly, we still don't really have enough information to draft the agreement, which is obviously problematic because then we have to go back and forth. We have contracting officers that have developed their own questions, but obviously it's not standardized right now because each one's kind of doing their own process. So we are currently working with operations and ORIS to figure out the best way to implement that into our submission process. So as many of you are aware, with single submission coming, it is not the easiest of tasks to update Alice since Alice is going away in the near future. So we're either going to update it directly into Alice, or we may do kind of a workaround and have a smart form link where it would prompt you to fill out the smart form and then it's submitted that way. But we hope to finalize that in the next week or two and release it shortly thereafter. And again, just the goal is really if we have all of the information up front, we don't have to have this back and forth, and it will expedite the total time for the DUA and MTA to get executed. And I did want to touch on subcontracts because the DUA terms are also often relevant for subcontracts too. So we've tried to, whenever possible, put the DUA terms into the actual subcontract. Unfortunately, there's certain times when we can't do it that way. And in that case, we actually started this 6 months or a year ago. We send the information that we've collected through our sub intake process to the other team that will be drafting the DUA so that it's not, the department doesn't have to submit the same information twice. But since we are updating our DUA and MTA submission questions, we're also updating that form that we use for the subcontracts.
All right, so what are some of the new DUA questions that you're going to see? A lot of you have already seen a lot of this stuff. If you've dealt with me, then you get a page long of questions and you're going to recognize a lot of this. Kim was talking about some standardization, right? Getting some continuity between the teams and the different officers. I'm just going to quickly go over a few things we're working on. We're working on getting them into a smart form. I know everybody loves smart forms, but this is kind of where we are. We were going to do a screenshot, but we're still working on this. So please understand that as we do this, right, we're going to continue to modify these things, right? Because we learn every day. All of us learn every day. And so we're going to continue to modify these to make sure that it makes sense to you, right? One of the things that I discovered is that lawyers think differently than engineers. What makes sense to me I'm not UNC counsel. That's my lawyer disclaimer. I just play one on TV. But my brain doesn't work like an engineer's brain. And so I've discovered that in my questions. It makes absolute perfect sense to me. And then I get this answer back and I'm like, well, clearly we're not going here. So we're going to keep improving, make sure that we're all meshing. So this is just kind of a roadmap of kind of where we're starting. Again, for those of you that have worked with me, you've seen a lot of this stuff. Couple of the things we're going to be working on is, what is your Ramsey's number? What is your IRB number? One of the things we're concerned with is, do we have limitations to transfer and do the work that you're suggesting? Right? Does your informed consent and your IRB allow you to transfer it to Duke? Right? Because it may not. And if it doesn't, we've got to amend it. We've got to do these things. If you did it as some kind of sponsored project, there could be limitations on whether or not you can use it commercially, right? If you got some philanthropic grant, there may be a clause in there that says you can't sell it, send it to Merck, right? You can't send it to somebody who's going to use it for commercial processes. And so we're trying to catch those things, because data is often kind of this child of something else that happens upstream. And so we're trying to catch it downstream, because the money and everything happened a year ago. And we're trying to make sure that everybody's on board, so that when we transfer the data, everybody can do it within the guidelines that are set out. Third parties, that's another good one. The way our process is set up, you guys are, as I mentioned earlier, y'all are setting up Alice numbers and are going in this giant bucket. And if you didn't mention that this is part of a bigger project, or it wasn't clear to us it was part of a bigger project, I'm going to get the agreement with University of Wisconsin. My colleague's going to get the one with Alabama, and my other colleague is going to get the one with, UC Davis. And so now we've got three of us working on essentially the same project, and it winds up creating a backlog and problems. And as you can imagine, left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. This helps us streamline that. We know that if I'm doing the project, I need Alabama, I need Wisconsin, and I need UC Davis. Okay. That's what we're doing. Also, we need to know, is it Carolina data warehouse data? That again can create a lot of problems on the back end that we've had to deal with. We're trying to eliminate a simple yes or no question to that. Saves you weeks and months of weeping and gnashing of teeth on that. Going back to joint analysis of publication, that's kind of our determining factor as to whether this is a DUA or a collaboration. That's kind of where we make that determination. That's the line in the sand for us. That's where we do this agreement versus that agreement. And that's where we may need to tag in other departments, that sort of thing. So we need to know that. Specific HIPAA identifiers. Are you sending PHI? Is this a limited data set? Obviously, different things have different needs as far as what protections that data gets, the transmission, the encryption, that sorts of good stuff. So we need to know about that. One that we're seeing a lot more is the European Union. We're getting into the GDPR, and Godspeed, right? Like it's that we need to know. If you're working with the GDPR, that's going to delay your project. It is what it is. There's very limited negotiating that goes on. There's a lot of non-conforming things that we have to work through. And so that in and of itself is just big delay right there. So we need to know about that. Do we anticipate IP? Again, going back, if you have this very specific gene that you've worked your whole career to narrow down and get, and you guys have worked, in tandem to make this happen, we want to protect it, right? We want to make sure that that's protected, and anything that comes after it is protected. So if you guys think that, we're really smart and we think that things are going to progress to that, we absolutely want to make sure that we have something beyond generic IP language that we might include. And then obviously we want to know the data elements sent and received. Those are some of those things. Now, what are the benefits here? Most of you are going to recognize those questions, right? I know my team members have been implementing those questions. I know we've all been working on them. You're going to recognize them already. We're changing it, but you're going to see a lot of that. Most of you already know what that looks like. The question is, when are you going to get it? It provides all of the needed, most of, we want it to be all, but, don't hold us to that, right? Like, I don't want an email that said, well, you told me all of it. And because, things get wonky and there's different project needs, but we're hoping to get all of the needed data so that we can get the draft going, right? So when I'm ready to sit there and I've wrapped up my problem child for the day and I can focus on you and what you have going on, that I have the information that I need, that I can go full on and get your project moving. It also gives us the idea of what additional terms we might need. Is this an MTA that needs to collaborate? Is this a collaboration where we're transferring data ownership? There's all kinds of different things. It gives us something on the front end to kind of prepare for the agreement that we need to make sure that we're starting in the right place. All those messy divorce things we talked about earlier, we're hoping to avoid those. All those crazy delays, we're hoping to avoid those as often as we can. And we want to make sure you get the protections that you and the university need. And we need to know the answers to those questions to get the right agreement, to get the right questions, so that everybody can play together and play nicely. That's what we want to do at the end of the day. And I don't know, back to the busy. Sorry, I know it. I feel it in my soul. We're hoping to reduce the intrusion into your busy lives. If we get all this on the front end, hopefully we're not bothering you guys as you're out here doing your most important work to keep these things going. So one final thing I did want to say is it's my understanding, Kim, correct me if I'm wrong here, what the proposal is once you get your ALICE submission, our administrative team is going to send you these DUA questions. These questions that y'all have been receiving from me or from one of my colleagues, this is going to come almost immediately after it's created. And so that when it's assigned to me, your answers are already going to be in there. So you're not really doing extra work per se. It may feel that way in the beginning because you're doing the submission and then you're immediately going to do the questions. So it feels a little bulkier in the beginning, and it probably is, but the reality is you're already doing this. And the hope is that we're going to streamline this a little bit so that we can keep things moving a little bit faster. So, and I'm going to send it back to Kim.
Thanks, Khadija. And I'm going to try to go quickly. I know we're almost at time, but we did want to talk about the MTA specifically. I know Khadija gave a good overview of the changes with the DUAs. And as I mentioned earlier, I did just want to reiterate that the majority of MTAs go to the tech transfer office and they're submitted via Blue. What comes to the contracting team is any MTA that's funded or any MTA that includes identifiable data. And the problem that we've been experiencing is that we don't even ask those questions on the front end currently. So we will actually start working on MTAs. You know, it'll take the time to go through our intake process, get assigned to a contracting officer. Then the contracting officer will start asking questions and we'll realize, oh, wait, this isn't funded. This doesn't have identifiable data. It should really go to tech transfer. So we do want to ask more questions on the front end. As Khadija said, it may seem to be annoying because it may seem like it takes more time, but really overall it will expedite the total process because we'll have that on the front end. So the questions that we're adding to MTAs are, is it material coming in, material going out, or both? Does it include identifiable data? Is there funding specific to the material transfer? We're going to ask for the IRB number, a description of the material being transferred, whether it's human tissue, and whether data is also being transferred. And as I said, this will really enable us to identify the correct office to handle the MTA at the front end and collect all of the information so that as soon as we have the full submission, we can go ahead and draft the MTA. Okay, so with that, are there any questions? I know we're about out of time.
Any questions other than what's on the lunch menu, right? Like that's my question. Anybody know that one? I need lunch menu answers here.
We did have two from the Q&A from the online version. And the first question is, when in the process should a DUA be submitted? When we initiate subaward agreements, we are asked if there's a DUA on file, but we are usually in the startup process.
So it really can be at at any point. So our preference is to include it in the subcontract. So it's fine when they're submitting their subcontract, it's completely fine for them to say, no, there's not. And then we will put it in the subcontract. Sometimes due to the nature of the project, there may be a DUA that was executed prior to the subcontract, with the subrecipient. So it applies to the data being transferred. Yeah, so I don't know that there is a right or wrong way to do it. And we try to streamline it so we can accommodate both situations.
I will say the sooner the better, right? Because, strangely enough, my counterparts aren't just sitting there waiting for me to email them. I don't know why. I thought I had a direct line to these folks, but apparently I don't. And so obviously we've got to negotiate that and get them on board with those terms. And so that takes time. I had somebody yesterday email me and say their entire system had been down for weeks and they were backlogged. I've had a situation where they completely closed their Office of Sponsored Projects or whatever their version of it was. So I've heard that they have brought in, and I won't say the university, but they've been tagging in alumni from their law school to help them with their contracts because they don't have enough contracting officers. They don't have enough folks. So these are regular occurrences that we're seeing delays. And then believe it or not, I get a vacation too sometimes. Like they allow me out for I have allowed out periodically. So the sooner the better, right? I think that's probably a good answer too.
Then the next one is, can we tailor standard questions by department or center since most submissions from that department or center may be similar?
So I would encourage whoever submitted that to reach out to us offline and we can talk about it. I would say what we were hoping to do was make the questions that we've generated broad enough to include everything so that there wouldn't have to be department specific questions. But if they want to reach out to me and Khadijah, we're happy to discuss.
Anybody else? Any non-lunch questions? Anybody? Well, thank you so much for showing up, for sitting here in the heat. Thank you.